Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My sincere apologies I cannot join you today, simply on the fact that I was on a plane, but it had technical issues and it was connected to the airport and I missed all my connections. My apologies for any noises I'm at the moment thinking about is going to be back home.
International Agency for Research on Cancer, working organization that I'm going to mention a bit later. We had a meeting where we looked at occupational exposure as a firefighter. For those who are not familiarized with, it's kind of World Health Organization classifying chemicals and work or occupation hazards. Within the also worldwide applications, I was invited as a member on the WE fires. We call them Wide and Urban Interface fires that was committed and commissioned by the US government. And I'll say something about that a bit later. Within the UK, as I could see that there are quite a few colleagues from UK, I was scientific expert on the Grenfell inquiry, and I also provided evidence to House of Commons and Parliament on many aspects related to fire. In terms of the firefighter occupation, I don't think it will get easier really, simply on the fact that we've got very dynamic process of changing not only chemicals that are used in a product, but also the products that are released on the market and in terms of the fire. So we can see for the last 20 years really replacement of the natural products with the plastic content. And as you know, for those who are firefighters, that plastic content is not only producing much more than smoke, but also much higher concentrations of toxic cocktail and types of the toxins that would might lead potentially to the deleterious health outcome. And if we look in terms of the global approach, we can see that fire smoke actually contributes to the deaths, within the immediate effect or within the longer term health effect. But the fire toxicity, so whatever is released from the products, it's still not regulated. In terms of the public is decreasing, we can see a number of increase of fires such as tall high-rise buildings. Wildland fires, obviously we've got very personal experience with that in Greece, but also exposure to chemicals such as perfluorinated chemicals, PFAS, flame retardants, or so on. So if we look at the firefighters' exposures, there are two major factors that affect firefighter health. That would be the fire condition and what's burning. Obviously, different types of burning materials and products will release different types and concentrations of chemicals that will have different outcome on the health. And that concentration and type of toxins will change if, for example, the fire is very small, such as smoldering, or if it's flaming, if it's small or big, such as flashover. And additionally to that, we've got three different phases that firefighters are exposed. That would be gas phase, which is kind of firefighter may inhale directly. We've got also deposition, which would be going on the firefighter clothing, such as PPE, and then transported to their workplace, or it can be transported to their home. And then obviously post cleanup or post contamination. If I'm talking too quickly, just shout and I'll slow down. Then we've got not only what firefighters are exposed, but we've got also different exposure routes. So the major or the most commonly recognized would be inhalation, that firefighters would have the highest amount of cancers from inhalation of toxins, which actually is not totally true. Within the last decade, we recognize that not only inhalation, but dermal intake, so absorption of toxins via skin, is equally important. Additionally to that, you will have also a link to the digestive cancers. That's something which might be correlated with drinking or eating with the sooty hands, and the contaminants of toxins going through the mouth, swallowed, going to the digestive organs. And obviously firefighters, such as on wildland fires, will be exposed acutely, which means within some of the immediate effect, depending on the concentration, but also they will have a longer term exposure. And the longer term exposure, we're talking about toxins which might be not in a very high concentrations, but firefighters are regularly exposed to those. Very good example would be soot. Soot would be precursor of benzene. Benzene is classified carcinogen, and it will be released in every single fire. And as you can see, you've got acute and chronic toxicants. They will differ, and they will have a different health outcome and different endpoint, toxicological endpoint. So some of them might be carcinogenic, leading to cancer. Some of them might lead to the cardiovascular diseases such as heart attack and stroke, and so on. The problem that we do not know yet is that the fire obviously is extremely complex. It releases huge cocktail of toxins, and they might have accumulated effect, and they might not only lead to the one single health outcome. As I know that you're struggling and fighting with a very high number of the wildland fires, the one thing that is really coming to attention is what we call wildland-urban interface fires. And those are when the wildland fire is starting affecting the cities or the domestic locations with the urban interface. In the US, there were quite few huge fires, which actually were called WUI fires, and that led to proper investigation and also a group of combining group of scientists to identify the research gaps that can address and can tackle those fires. For anyone interested, that report is released. The link is at the bottom, or just put National Academy of Sciences and WUI fires, and that report is out there. It is looking at almost everything, every single aspect. It looks at the firefighters' exposure, it looks at the toxins and chemicals released from those types of the fires, and so on. So where are we up to in terms of firefighters' higher risk occupation? Europe is more or less around 40 years behind of US, around 30 years behind Canada. So 40 years ago, California was the first state in US introducing presumptive legislation for firefighters. Currently, at the moment, we've got, or US has 48 out of 50 states got presumptive legislation for firefighters. And also many of the states offers health monitoring to early detect cancers. Some of the states got also mandatory health monitoring on an annual basis. Canada just follow up that, so they've got it for over 30 years, and Australia around 10 years ago. More recently, 2 years ago, Holland introduced presumptive legislation for 13 cancers for firefighters. However, it's still, in order to get compensation, there is a requirement to provide the evidence that was gained during their career that there is occupational cancer. And as I mentioned last year, IORC, International Agency for Research on Cancer, World Health Organization, actually identified direct link between firefighters' work and cancer. And that evidence was found particularly for two cancers, which was mesothelioma from asbestos and also bladder. There are 5 additional cancers where there is strong evidence, but it's not enough to classify as a one for that. But overall, for all types of the firefighters, we got that debate in European Parliament last week. If it's volunteer or not volunteer firefighter should be excluded, included. IARC announced the classification carcinogenic as an occupation for firefighter for all types of firefighters. That includes volunteers. And interestingly, just over the Christmas or just before the Christmas, US Senate announced that within a short time scale of probably this year, in the US, firefighters do not have to provide any more exposure logbook in order to get compensation. In other words, they will be automatically given compensation without have to go through the whole process of proving that the firefighter got that cancer over the last 20 or 30 years. So now the following slides would be actually discussion on what is happening in the UK. Obviously, there were a lot of studies in US, Canada, Australia, and so on, but very little was done in UK. So 2017, Fire Brigades Union approached us and commissioned the work to look at the firefighters' exposures and also their health outcome. The justification for it was that obviously there is so much work done outside of UK that it not necessarily can be adopted because there are different rules, different procedures, different techniques, and so on. So FBU actually wanted to see if there is any association between firefighters' exposures and if there is any increased occurrence of firefighters in the UK who have cancers or other diseases. So the first thing we did was that actually there was really no information whatsoever in terms of contaminants. There was really good coverage on the asbestos, but not necessarily in terms of the fire contaminants or fire toxins, I call them. So the way we approached that is that we set up a 3-month survey, which ran in 2020. Firefighters hated me because there was 64 questions, and I know that firefighters usually like less than 30. We kept that questionnaire only to serving firefighters, simply on the fact that we wanted to see the current state of the fire rescue services and firefighters' approaches towards the contaminants. And obviously retired firefighters would have a slightly different view based on their age of the serving in a fire rescue service. I'm quite pleased because we got around 11,000 responders on that, which more or less is around 24% of the UK firefighters workforce. And we publish now in January 4 publications analyzing the data. The data is analyzed in terms of likelihood of developing cancer. So we look at the firefighters' activities and the likelihood of developing cancer. So I'll talk a bit more in a detail, but it also led that kind of data to best practice report, I call it, which is minimizing firefighters' exposure to fire toxins. It's publicly all available, including publications. You can download it and read it. Following the best practice report, actually Fire Brigades Union initiated DECON campaign, which is the contamination campaign, looking and introducing and changing culture in fire rescue service in the UK. And that's kind of, I think, widely publicized and easily available. So if anyone's got questions, just give a shout. But what I was really shocked, I would say, was that the best practice document has been now translated into 6 different languages. And I could hear, I think, Peter over there. So hi, Peter. Peter helped to translate it into Portuguese. So the document was translated in few languages in Europe. Interestingly, now it has been finalized 2 weeks ago and translated into Chinese, where they want to adopt it. So it's getting quite well distributed. But even more interesting fact is that Polish government translated that document and implemented as a mandatory document for minimizing exposure to fire toxins. They used recommendations and they implemented those recommendations. So, for example, separating clean and dirty PPE in all fire rescue services. So all those recommendations must be met by January this year. So quite a lot of changes in that respect, especially particularly in Poland. So what actually leads to cancers? So the first part of the results that we've done is that we went to 22 UK fire rescue services and we did indoor air quality. So we look at the fire contaminants and if those fire contaminants can be found in the fire offices, firefighters' PPE and so on. And one of the things that I'm just going to show you is that obviously we found that black thing on the white, it is the soot. And all that list of the chemicals you've got, they are classified as carcinogenic or possibly carcinogenic. Those are precursors of the soot. So that's analysis of the black thing that you've got on the white, which we call soot. And the things that you can see is that you've got, for example, contamination on the helmet. You've got contamination on a mask, which is taken from the training instructors. But we also learned that obviously the mask should be clean. And then as you can see, it was really black, wasn't properly clean. We just unscrew almost everything to see if the contaminant's getting there. And what you can see is that with that black soot, what firefighters inhaling, the amount of the toxins and the concentrations is really going up to 8 times, 10 times magnitude higher. The other thing that we learned is that we took also gas monitoring or air quality monitoring for the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, I call them PAHs, in the offices and appliance bay in fire engines. That's published, so also you can easily download it, free, publicly available. And we also found that those contaminants actually are coming from the fire incident to the firefighters' workplaces. So firefighters are not only exposed at the fire incident, but they're bringing those contaminants to their workplace. And if you look at volunteers, that will be also transported at the back of their car to their home and to the family, which is really well documented in the US publications. The other thing that we also learned is that only 1/3 of firefighters actually clean their contaminated PPE after attending the fire incident. Then we also learned that almost 45% or almost half of firefighters did not separate dirty and clean PPE at the workplace. So in other words, you just putting contaminants or crossover contamination from the dirty PPE to the clean PPE. PPE is personal protective equipment. And then we also learned that more than half of firefighters, they store contaminated fire gloves within the other items such as helmets. So then firefighters' scalp or hair are directly contaminated from the previous contamination. They also store them in boots, tunic, trousers, and pockets, and so on. However, a really important thing that we at the moment trying to push forward was that because there is no regulation, there is no guidance or policy in the UK on mandatory wearing respiratory protection equipment, we learned that from the survey that actually firefighters, 84% of them do not wear it. And it's particularly during the damp over or post-fire, so you can see that the fire is smoldering, or at the big fire, and I'm excluding wide-down fires here. Obviously, you cannot wear breathing apparatus during the wide-down fires, and if there is any respiratory protection, it's causing a lot of issues. But if we're talking about waste fires, such as you've got on a FATA, firefighters do not wear protection. And the factors that are affecting it is mostly habits, but also nobody else wears it because there is no recommendation to do that. I don't have to wear it, so I chose not to. And I'm told to not to wear it, or generally you've got also time constraints and a few other factors. But the overall information came because I'm told that I don't have to. I decided to not to. Sadly, we also learned from the questionnaire, so from the almost 11,000 responders, that 4% of our responders have been already diagnosed with the cancer. And 3 messages on that is, as you can see on the top of the graph, the major dominant of the cancer is skin, which indicates dermal intake of toxins. And then you've got lymphoma or you've got leukemia, which are rare cancers. So if we, for example, trying to correlate specific cancer to specific fire effluent, that's really hard simply because fire is generating thousands of toxins, and we're not quantifying really even, I would say, even 1% of those that are released. We're just focusing only on what we know. And those cancers are rare cancers. So that's one message. Second message is that the types of the cancers that firefighters have been diagnosed will be slightly different that the firefighters are dying from. Because some of the cancers will give a warning, like skin and changes on the skin, and the firefighters have a higher chances to recover, they're curable. While for the rare cancers, they're not giving any warning, so the recovery chances are very low, and therefore they might lead to the much higher ratio of the cancer mortality rates. The other thing that we learned is that, I know it's going to be a little bit complicated, but if you go for the odds ratio is telling you cancer likelihood. What is the cancer likelihood of developing amongst firefighters? So if you've got anything higher than 1, it tells you that there is a direct link with statistical significance to develop the cancer. And as you can see, if you've got a firefighter who served more than 15 years, the cancer likelihood is around 2 times higher. Again, contaminants at the workplace, if the cleaning is not taken seriously, or if you have no designated clean and dirty PPE in the station, or simply a smell of fire at the workplace, the cancer likelihood is anything between 1.5 to 2 times. The other thing you can see is personal decontamination. So something like eating with the sooty hands in contaminated PPE, that's also around 2 times. Remaining in contaminated PPE for more than 4 hours after the incident, or soot in the nose for a prolonged time, also leading to twice higher cancer likelihood. We also evaluated mental health through our questionnaire, which was kind of only 2 or 3 questions. And we try to relate mental health outcomes to the contaminants. There is a huge wealth of the data, again, from Canada and US, where particulate matter, which is generated really in a high quantities from the wildland fires, has direct link to anxiety and depression. And knowing that firefighters attend wildland fires do not have protection, they might have that association between fire contaminants and mental health. Obviously, mental health is also a very complex topic, and there are a lot of other factors, such as traumas and personal experiences affecting that. But as you can see, what we learned is that firefighters, again, they've got much higher ratio of mental health conditions compared to the English population. And the 2 dominating one is anxiety and the depression. The next one that we've got is culture, and I think it is really, really important, simply on the fact that because there is no knowledge on, or there was no knowledge on contaminants, firefighters were not aware, so they were doing typical practices from the older generation of firefighters who just got used to things over the time. And the badge of honor is in other words saying, if I'm having a dirty face with the suit, it seems that I've done something, so that would be taken me more seriously. What you can see on a graph is that actually more than half, more than 50% of firefighters, they do believe that there is badge of honor. What is really telling is that 46%, they said, yes, I believe that badge of honor exists, but it's not me, it's the others who believe that, which kind of tells you in terms of the approaches towards the topic. And then when we looked at the badge of honor, we identified that those who answer, yes, I do believe in badge of honor, those were the firefighters who were eating with the sooty hands, who had for prolonged time soot in the nose, so they didn't do any decontamination in relation to the PPE or personal decontamination. And also the firefighters who actually believed in badge of honor was also associated with lack of training on fire effluents, on their effect on the health and their potential outcome in terms of health. So the next work that we've done was looking at the cancers, and it was quite interesting in terms of the data analysis that we just heard one presentation earlier. We managed to get only to Scottish data, and the problem with data analysis we've got, and it's not only within the UK, it's actually international approach, is that every country will record data differently. Even in the UK, if we want to look at the cancer mortality rates, let's say in UK, United Kingdom, we've got 4 regions that are recording data differently, which is Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and England. Additionally, if we're going to England, each region records data differently. And that's in terms of the age of firefighters, in terms of the pensioners, and so on. So trying to compare the data is absolutely, I think it's fantastic to have the data out there, but it has to be really careful analysis to make sure that we're comparing apple to apple. So the data that we managed to get was looking at the Scottish firefighters' cancer deaths. And we looked for the last 20 years. And what you can see is the majority of firefighters who are dying, they're dying from malignant neoplasms, which are cancers. And that's followed by 28%, which are circulatory system diseases, which are heart failure. And if, for example, looking at the inhalation types of cancers and the deaths, you can see that it's actually in minority. It's kind of around 6%. So 2 things. If we follow for the circulatory system diseases, which are heart, the 2 dominating mortalities are heart attack and stroke. And it is, again, coming back to US and Canadians who are doing this for the last 40 years, and they've got huge wealth of information. The majority of the heart attack and strokes are actually coming from wildland fires because of the burden and also because of the inhalation of the toxins or dermal intake or just generally exposure to fire toxins. Particulate matter is really good, strong link between heart diseases. And we know, again, that particulate matter and the volatile organic substances are released in very huge concentrations, high concentrations from fires. So that's kind of where we got that. And what is really astonishing is that on the left, you've got UK data, which you've got the types of the cancer mortality rates in Scottish firefighters. On the left. On the right, you've got United States. And what you can see, actually, the trend is very similar. You've got, in the US, majority of line of duty firefighters, they're dying from cancer. And that's followed, again, by the cardiovascular diseases, such as stroke and heart attack. Again, respiratory and few other ones are in a kind of minor quantities. But that tells us that when we, and it was really interesting question last week in European Parliament, because our speakers were asking, we need more data, we need more information on that. And the chairman asked,
do we really need more data on cancers and firefighters, particularly when the IARC actually announced that there is a class 1, so there is a direct link between firefighters, cancers, and their occupation. And US, Canada has got presumptive legislation for over 30, 40 years. And my response was, actually, we do not need to really have more data on that in terms of getting firefighters compensations, in terms of protecting firefighters, because the trends that we've got between UK and US are very similar. There are publications from the European countries as well as Scandinavians, Spain, Germany, which are looking at the cancer incidences. But because the data is recorded differently, it's very hard to compare it. The other things that we learned is that one thing, Scottish firefighters, and I would say that's more or less, I can say globally, is that from US and Canadians, we know that firefighters do die from cancers at the younger age. And in terms of our data, we actually learned that firefighters dying around 15 to 20 years earlier compared to the general public. Obviously, that depends on the type of the cancer. For example, mesothelioma takes 20-25 years to have symptoms to develop. Leukemia, which is rare cancer, typically takes 5-10 years. So depending on the type of the cancer, but we still can see that firefighters dying between 15 to 20 years earlier. Keep in mind that the top peak for the cancer mortality among Scottish firefighters is around 65 to 69 years old. But the cancer incidence, when they have been diagnosed with the cancer, is between 45 to 49. Yeah, so it's much, much earlier. The top peak age for the cancer mortality rate for the public is 70 plus, 80 plus, apology for that. What else? The other thing is that the firefighters got high ratio of metastasis. Metastasis is spread of the cancer from one organ to the other, which indicates that the firefighters are exposed from the multiple pathways, such as dermal intake, inhalation, or digestion, rather than just only one pathway. And obviously, interactions in combination of toxins have also the outcome on that. The way we learned was that in terms of the cancer mortality in Scottish firefighters, we learned that prostate is around 4 times higher when we compare to the Scottish population. Leukemia, rare cancer, not giving any warnings, around 3 times higher. Digestive cancer, 2 times higher. And really, really depressing one, unknown behavior. Unknown behavior, it's 6 times higher. Unknown behavior is that the people who diagnosed cancer, they do not know where it comes from. They do not know where it's originated. So typically it's with the metastasis, multiple organs involved, and with very, very low chances of recovery. So that kind of indicates that it is related to the fire exposure. We also learned much higher mortalities for the diseases. So heart diseases, acute ischemic heart disease, it is a heart attack, in other words, which is 5 times higher. Stroke, around 3 times higher. Pulmonary diseases, which are lungs, more or less, 3 times. Renal failure, renal, 3 times higher. Renal failure is linked mostly to dehydration and also firefighter physiological response, such as, for example, high activity, the body temperature increases, let's say 2-3 degrees. Then there is much higher dermal intake of toxins, and there is much higher sweating ratio. So that leads to the renal failure. And musculoskeletal is also related to 5 times higher. So what we learned is that we know that firefighters come into contact on a very regular basis to combustion products. There are many of them. We typically testing only the ones that we know they're there. They definitely getting cancers earlier in life. We've got multiple exposures and routes. And the true relative risks related to fire carcinogens might be actually much higher than it is reported, because the major problem we've got in our records is that when firefighter is retiring, which is typically quite young age, I would say, it's around 50 to 60 years old, he might get another occupation. And on a death certificate, we usually record the latest occupation, which might be the second job that the firefighter got when he retired. So it's not a firefighter. So we're missing quite a high proportion of the firefighters who were a firefighter who did not report their occupation on the death certificate. So what we currently do in the UK, so we at the moment carrying on a national health monitoring program. This is mostly done to provide a health monitoring package for firefighters. So the idea is that we're taking 1,000 firefighters from UK and we're testing blood and urine for fire effluents and metabolites that they've got in their system. We know that there will be some that will be staying for a very long time in our system. We're testing also clinically samples for 64 diseases and cancers. I know it's a lot, and it's only kind of 4 tubes of blood. It's a lot, but some of the cancers, like rare cancers, they're not giving any warnings. So they need to be specifically, so the testing that we do has to be specifically focused on the firefighter, not general public. Just simply because if we've got a firefighter who has been, let's say, who is not feeling well and he's 50 years old, he will be not tested, for example, for leukemia, because the GP or the doctor will assume that leukemia is coming at the age of 80 plus. So he will be not screened for that. So we're introducing that testing for just focusing and targeting firefighters' diseases and cancers. We've got the contamination, we've got best practice document, which kind of provides suggestions which do not cost for the minimizing exposure to fire toxins. And we also introducing and recommending fire rescue services to start introducing trainings on fire contaminants, so we can make firefighters more aware of contaminants and the health outcomes, but also we can start changing culture and behavior, which is almost half of the success to start looking at the minimizing firefighters' cancers and diseases. And I think on that ground, thank you for your attention. I'll take any questions.
Anna, thank you very much. Anna, thank you very much.
I can hear you.
Okay, give me one moment. We have one question.
Hello, my name is Timos. I want to apologize because I think I misunderstood the numbers. I read 42% of Scottish firefighters in 2 decades, the sample, and 65% dying from cancer. Does that not include natural causes? It just seems too high.
Right. So if you look at the UK, it includes other causes. So all the other causes, such as, for example, traffic accidents, suicidal, or anything like that, that's counted 7% for the Scottish firefighters' deaths over the last 20 years. We've got 42% of all the, so we've taken the data for all the firefighters' recorded deaths for the last 20 years. And we looked how many of them died from the cancer, how many of them died from the other causes. So it is 42%. In US, it is 67%. So 67 is in the US. In the UK, it's 40, or in Scottish firefighters, it's 42%.
Thank you.
Κάποιος άλλος να ρωτήσει κάτι? Any more questions? Okay. Anna, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. And apologies for not being in person. But yes.
Sorry, we didn't hear you.
My apologies for the challenges, and apologies again for not being in person. But any questions, please drop me an email. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.